I think there's no doubt in my mind that the end of this camper van is definitely going to be because of rust.
Well, miss, I guess I'll be on my way now.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Ever since me and Kaylee bought this Sprinter T1N, we have been dealing with rust. Right from the start, when I first went to look at the vehicle, it really worried me. But since we were getting it for such a good price, I thought I could deal with it and try to tackle this rust problem as best as I can. And I have learned a lot of tricks along the way that I wanted to share with you. I know there's a lot of videos out there with rust and they're all fantastic. The real world tests are great to watch, and I would definitely recommend doing a lot of research, but I wanted to share with you the things that I've learned, and specifically two Sprinter T1Ns as well. Let's get into it. Make sure to stick around until the end of this video because I'm going to be showing you a spot that I'm going to be treating on the inside of our door. It's really in a hard place to access, but I'm going to be showing you my steps and how I'm going to be fighting this rust as best as I can. The thing about rust that I've learned is it is almost impossible to get rid of unless you cut it out completely. Fighting rust is kind of an ongoing process. You're never going to be able to completely eliminate it. The best you can do is kind of stop it in its tracks from going any further. So there are 4 ways to treat rust. The first is going to be to encapsulate it. So these are going to be using products like Pore 15 or Eastwood's Rust Encapsulator. These products are basically designed to go straight over rust and stop any oxygen or moisture from getting at the rust, therefore halting it. These products do work quite well, and there are certain scenarios where I would recommend using them. I have used Pore 15 in a few places that I will show you guys. The thing about these are they do dry to a very hard ceramic-like finish, so if you use them on a body panel on the outside of your vehicle or van and the body panel flexes or heats up a lot in the sun, the coating will crack and then moisture and oxygen will get in there and start to rust again. So you want to avoid using these in these places. Pore 15 also isn't UV resistant, so using it in places that are exposed to the sun aren't a good idea at all. It is also somewhat difficult to paint. I've tried a lot of different ways of painting it, and it usually ends up flaking off and cracking the paint and not adhering properly to the Pore 15. I wouldn't recommend painting it. I actually have some of the Pore 15 metal prep right here. I just recently ran out of the can that I had, but this is part of the multi-step process that you want to do when using Pore 15. The second way to treat rust is by using a lanolin based lubricant. My go-to is fluid film just because it's very easy to access where I'm at and it tends to work quite well. This is one of my favorite ways to stop corrosion or prevent rust. So by applying a film to the outside of the metal, it basically removes all of that moisture and displaces it on the outside of the film. The thing about the lanolin based lubrication methods are the fact that you need to apply them at least annually. So they do end up washing off over time. They do stay as like a liquid tacky base. This one actually has a bit of an odor, just a forewarning, but they do work quite well. And because they stay as a liquid form, they can heal themselves over. So rock chips, things like that, if there are scars, this will basically creep and cover that area that gets exposed. On this vehicle, I tend to use this in places that don't get washed a lot, that do end up getting rusted. I'm gonna end up treating probably most of the undercarriage of this vehicle in this to help stop the corrosion and prevent any future corrosion from happening. The third way to combat rust is by converting it to a phosphate state. So this is by using products like Rust Cutter or Ospo. Kerasteel does a similar job, but these products you can basically spray right onto the rust and they convert them to a phosphate state that you can then paint over with a primer, or you can apply a lanolin based lubrication like the fluid film. I would always recommend applying a rust converter just to try and tackle any remaining rust on the surface that you may have, and then applying products like fluid film or a primer and then a paint if you plan on painting over the area. The thing about the rust converters is they aren't a final step, and you do need to prime over them to stop rust from spreading further. They are only designed to treat the rust on the area. They aren't designed to prevent rust in the future. The last way to treat rust is obviously just to cut it out. Now, I would recommend doing this in places where you can't reach the rust or it's completely inaccessible. So when two metals meet and they are together and rust is starting to creep into the surfaces that you can't access, that is one of the areas that you're going to need to cut out if you want to treat that. Another place that I would recommend cutting out the rust is if it's completely rotten through the metal, or while you're trying to scrape the loose rust away and you accidentally go through the metal. This metal is basically rotted and you're gonna need to fill it with a Bondo or fiberglass filler anyways. So you might as well just cut out that rust and fill the whole area with Bondo and prime it and treat it. All right, so I'm going to take you outside now and show you where all the problem areas we've treated rust are on the outside of our Sprinter. And there are quite a few, so there, 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 there. Now I wanted to talk about when and where to apply which treatment and how to decide. My experience with rust is it's always better to keep an eye on it and not to encapsulate it if you can. The reason for this being is most of those products only last a couple years maximum, depending on the environment, and then you'll just have to work harder to grind that product off. When using products like fluid film, you do have to apply them more regularly, but they are very easy to apply and it doesn't take very long. You can also still access that rust if you want to treat it further. In any place that you don't have to coat over it, I would just recommend leaving the rust, grinding as much off as you can, obviously, applying a rust converter like Osfo or Rust Cutter, and then applying a fluid film over top of it, especially in areas that aren't going to get pressure washed or you need to access often. If you are painting over the rust, like I've done on the outside of our van with the Raptor liner, I would recommend grinding off as much rust as possible using a wire brush, or I like to use a grind and just completely grind down to bare metal. And then I like to use the rust cutter to convert the rust and then apply a good 2K epoxy primer over top of it. And then you can apply your Raptor liner or your paint if you wish. Places where I have used encapsulators like Pore 15 are on the exterior metal mirror mounts. I actually coated those with Pore 15 and those are exposed to the sun, obviously. The Pore 15 has faded a bit and you can tell it is disintegrating a bit, I guess, but it has done a very good job. Another place I've used it is actually on the steps in the bumper. Those don't get exposed to as much sun because they're kind of hidden underneath the bumper. And the Pore 15 has actually held up super well. It has completely encapsulated that rust and the matte black finish actually looks pretty good. Another place I've used it is on the bracket for the sliding door and it has held up very well. The reason why I used the Pore 15 in these three areas is because these metals were very rigid. They were very coated with rust. I mean, seriously rusted. And they are easy to access and replace. I didn't want to put a lot of effort into these areas, so coating them with Pore 15 was the easiest way to just make them look better and also provide a good rust preventative coating to them. I'm not too worried about them scratching or getting beat up more because they're already in such bad shape. Places that I like to apply the rust converter and the fluid film are places like completely underneath the van, hinges. Any place that basically isn't easily accessible are places that I'm going to be using that fluid film. Where I'm actually going to be using just the converter and then a primer and then a Raptor liner is going to be on the outside of the van or anywhere that I am painting. These are the places that I'm going to try and grind away as much rust as possible and cut it out if need be. I can't stress this enough. It's super important that you treat all bare metal and existing rust spots as soon as you can because the rust will get worse very quickly, and we put so much effort into building out these camper vans. The last thing you want to do is have your van rust out completely. Just to give you guys a little update on the van too, finally got blinds for the Skylight. They took quite a while to come in and we had to order custom ones. These are double cellular blinds that are actually designed for windows, but we installed them on the Skylight, and check that out. So super easy just to slide back and forth. I basically just installed a magnet and we can just pull them right across, bam, magnetized. Just so nice at night. These will also help keep the van cool during the summertime and warmer during the wintertime, so we don't have all that heat escaping through the Skylight and all the heat coming in during the summertime. Oh, I'm just so excited. They are so nice. Now to this nasty little rust spot. I actually have 2 rust spots. They're about the size of, maybe a little bigger than like a toonie, but they're on the bottom of this sliding door on the side. And I'll try and get a good shot for you actually here. The rust spot is like right there. And it's right on the bottom of the door there. Just a super common place on these Sprinters as well, like right along the bottom door seams. I am going to possibly pop this bottom bracket off so the door will wiggle out a little bit more, giving me a little bit more space. And then I'm gonna go ahead and grab my grinder and just start grinding off all the rust and the paint around the area, making sure to get as much of the rust as possible. First up, I'm actually just gonna clean it using some of this super clean degreaser, just to try and get rid of any grease or dirt. I know I'm gonna be grinding it off anyways, but just wanna make sure that the area is as clean as possible. You can see that the paint is just super bubbled up in this area, so it shouldn't be too hard to get in there with the grinder. So it is basically down to bare metal. I'm gonna go underneath the door and try and get underneath there as well, just as much as possible. I have grinded this right down to bare metal. You can see it's nice and shiny. Now I'm just gonna grab the rust cutter and make sure that the area is thoroughly coated like that. And then that is basically just going to dry overnight. I'm gonna leave that for as long as it takes to dry. You'll notice when you apply it to really rusted areas that the rust actually ends up turning black, and you don't really have to worry about it. And then after this dries, it's gonna be kind of a white powder can sometimes form as well. You're just gonna wipe it clean. And then I'm just probably, over this area anyway, I'm probably just gonna do a quick white primer, a couple coats, maybe 2 or 3 coats of primer, and then I'm gonna keep an eye on it over the next year and see if the rust comes through. If it does, I'll have to grind it down again and treat it again. But this way you've got rid of as much rust as possible, and you've treated the remaining rust, if there is any, and you've turned it into a phosphate. This is the best way to do it, in my opinion. And then of course you can coat over top of it. If you want to use a rust encapsulator like a POR 15 now, that is totally up to you. You can do it. I've tried it in other places, but again, that rust usually comes through, and that POR 15 does tend to crack in some places, so that's why I don't like using it. The primer is a little bit more flexible, and the fluid film is also obviously super flexible. The only thing is you have to reapply it or be careful about washing it off. I hit this with 3 coats of just a white primer, and it's probably been about 2 to 3 weeks, and there's been no rust that's come through, which is really nice to see. I kind of debated on whether or not to hit it with the fluid film after doing this, and I think I am going to, just to give it that extra coating on the surface. But it looks really good so far, so hopefully this will last a couple years at least before the rust starts slowly coming through again. This wheel well is another area that gets super rusted. I coated this with POR 15 last summer, and you can see the rust is starting to come through. So now I'm gonna have to grind it all off again and treat it. But what I'm gonna do this time actually is probably clean it, apply some rust cutter to the inside of the wheel well, because I'm not sure how well that is coated because it's tough to see. And then I'm probably going to hit it with some fluid film, and hopefully that will displace the moisture and stop it from rusting any further. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you found it useful, be sure to subscribe and like, and thank you guys so much for watching. Also, comment below on what you've used in the past to treat rust. I'd love to hear from you. It's always good to learn about new products and new ways of treating rust. I'll see you guys in the next one.